Well, greetings to all of our friends and family, comrades, allies, and enemies out here. Welcome to this week's exciting episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program that is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about the institution of Black August and its connection to the worldwide African Revolution. So we're glad that you are here to join us for this important topic. Of course, every August is Black August, where we commemorate our freedom fighters, our African freedom fighters here in the United Snakes of America, as well as those allies who worked with and supported our liberation struggle. And the discussion today is continuing to honor those courageous soldiers, but also to talk about what their work meant in the context of fighting for revolution. And what does that revolution look like on a worldwide scale? Because that's the vision that we see that is necessary for us to get us where we want to go. So we're glad that you're here. We hope that you are at your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength, and want to just acknowledge the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. We have done quite a bit of work over the last several weeks, actually. Shakur knows exactly what I'm talking about. And when we had African Liberation Day in Oakland in May, the end of May, and then we organized a follow-up event in the beginning of July in Oakland. And then over the last 8 days, we have organized two separate Pan African Women's Day events, one in Oakland a week ago, Saturday, and one yesterday here in Sacramento, Pan African Women's Day events. And sitting there last Saturday in Oakland at beautiful Lake Merritt, and then yesterday in the park here in Sacramento, looking at the scenery, being outside, it always makes me think of the indigenous people because we're in their land. So whenever I'm outside, whenever I'm out in the country, wherever we're camping, whatever the case may be, I'm always thinking about the indigenous people because when I look at the land out here, when I look at the beauty of it, I think of what they have endured as a people, what they have fought through, what they have had to deal with, and how they continue to fight for their forward progress. Now, unfortunately, one of the fights they have to engage in is many of our people claiming that they're indigenous to this hemisphere, which is completely not only disrespectful to the actual indigenous people, but it's disrespectful to our African ancestors. So just always, again, when I'm outside, I think about the indigenous people to this hemisphere and what they've had to endure and fight through in order to maintain their dignity. And so just want to acknowledge that, like that's always on my mind. And of course, connected to that is our own African ancestors. Of course, everything reminds me of them. Everything that I experienced, everything that I think about, everything that happens throughout the day, every day reminds me of them. There's so much in this society growing up here, there's so much here that is connected to our kidnapping and being brought to this hemisphere. So many things that most people have no clue about, right? Everything from the words that people speak, the meanings of certain words, the activities, the things that go on, the institutions in this backward society. So much of it is connected to what has happened to our people that it's impossible if you're conscious of that not to think about it. Like just I was watching something on television for a brief moment, a commercial during a sporting game that was going on, and they were talking about gumbo, and it made me think of gumbo. That's a word, that's a con word for okra. And these are the types of things like our people here don't, for the most part, have no idea about. And you could even meet an African here in the U.S. who tells you they're not African, but they love gumbo and they call it gumbo, and their family has a tradition of making gumbo, which, and they have sickle cell anemia and all these things that could connect to absolutely nothing except Africa. So always thinking about our African ancestors. And of course, when I think about them, it's only a question of what can I do and what can we do to capture the dignity that our ancestors fought so vigilantly to ensure that we had. And I think if you're not thinking about it like that, then you're not really even thinking about it. That's the only way to think about it, is how to continue to uplift the dignity of our people, that our ancestors passed on. If you have dignity today, it's only because our ancestors passed it on to you. You didn't create it yourself. Your mother and father didn't create it for you. It's a part of our legacy as a people. And so that's why, there's nothing you can do if you're conscious. If you have your head in the sand or up your rear end or something like that, then you're not going to be aware of any of these things I'm talking about. But if you're a conscious human being and you're striving to be a conscious human being, then these are the things that you will always be thinking about. So we just want to say our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored again by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, an independent revolutionary political party, the AAPRP, with its base in Africa. We are in the infantile stages of building this party. I mean, you have to understand it in its conceptual format. We are talking about a political party that is organizing African people everywhere we are on the planet Earth, almost 120 countries, in English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Creole, Swahili, Wolof, Mandinka, Akan, all of these conditions on in all throughout Africa and Europe and the entire Western Hemisphere. This is what we're talking about. I mean, it's a major, major undertaking. It's a whole different level from just organizing your homeowners association or your bowling league or your church or whatever it is people do. It's a whole different undertaking than those things. And those of you that do those types of things, you're struggling to do that. So you can imagine how difficult it's going to be to build what we're talking about when we say Pan-African revolution. But we don't approach life from the standpoint of, oh, that's so difficult. We don't know if we can do that. We don't even talk like that. We don't even think like that. For us, the only question is, what do we need as a people? And once we resolve that, and for us, that argument is resolved, the answer is Pan Africanism, revolutionary Pan Africanism. Then the only other question is, how do we get it? And so we engage in the work. We make errors, we make efforts, we make more errors, we learn things, we do things better, and that's how we'll move the needle to get us where we need to be. So the APRP is one of the vehicles that's fighting for this objective of revolutionary Pan-Africanism, which is one defined as one united Africa under a scientific socialist government. That's the definition of Pan Africanism. And our work to achieve it is outlined by many people, but we have specific people who have been very exact in their analysis. And Kwame Nkrumah was one of them. And in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, the cover page, which is displayed on the screen, he lays out a strategy for how we achieve Pan Africanism. And the way that he identified that as being uniting all of the revolutionary Pan African formations throughout Africa who agree that Pan Africanism is one unified socialist Africa. And so this is the work that we do. And for those of us who don't currently live in Africa, there's plenty of work for us to do, to build onto this process. I just gave you. I mean, I'm obviously physically. I go to Africa often, but I live physically very far, thousands of miles and water away from Africa. But the work that I just described to you that we've done the last couple of months is focused around nothing else except uplifting African consciousness and building towards revolutionary Pan Africanism. So it doesn't really matter where you are. you can make a contribution to this work, and we do that to the best of our ability every day. So this particular program, Our Ancestors' Voices, is sponsored each week, every Sunday, same time, same platform, same place, and it's hosted by myself, Ajamu, and my biological daughter and ideological daughter, Shakura Umi, who is now Dr. Shakura Umi. So let's get started on this important topic for today, Black August and the African Revolution. And I'll turn it over to Shakura to get us going.
Thank you. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. I'm so excited to talk about this topic today. We actually, as Baba Jamu referred to, we had some beautiful edutainment yesterday at our Pan African Women's Day event. And part of the bio for the entertainers who presented mother daughter duet known as Straight Out Scribes. Dr. V.S. Chochezi, as well as her mother, Stajabu, long time entertainers in the Sacramento area, and have created quite a resume, if you will, of recorded media. So you all should definitely do some searches for them and check them out. But I bring them up because they also have made it part of their mission to represent the political prisoners who have been wrongly accused. And part of their work as alliance and as um, I would say advocates for what is right in terms of African prisoners, for example, is to continue to spread the word. And so they brought a card yesterday to the event and circulated it so that we could sign it on behalf of our comrade, Mumia Abu Jamal. And so just kind of using that as a lens, right, to kind of help us focus on different ways that, we all can contribute. I also recall, before I jump into this slide, I also recall that in some cases, maybe you don't really know the full story of why the prisoner was falsely accused of a crime or why they were wrongly convicted or whatever that could be. But it's our responsibility to still investigate and to try to figure out what the truth and the base of justice is based on what really happened. And I highlight that because as a little girl, I remember getting in the car early on Saturday mornings to drive down to Dublin because my dad and my mom saw it as important for me to have this connection with my auntie and longtime comrade, Marilyn Buck, right? And you all know we've done seminars on Marilyn Buck before. We've also done seminars on Assata Shakur, and we've done seminars that have connected to the Black Liberation Army, where we talked about how because the Black Liberation Army was able to organize Assata's escape, it's because of the help of Marilyn Buck that they were able to do that. And being in a position where you understand what kind of role models you want to have in your life. I'm speaking from the vantage point of my dad being a parent, but even if you don't have children, you know what kind of people you want in your life. You know what kind of people you don't want in your life. If you don't know that yet, maybe you're still figuring that out. That's okay, but you can kind of assume that if these people were wrongly accused of saying that they did something that they did not do, and more importantly, they were doing something to stand for the people, there's probably a good assumption that you probably want to know more about them, especially if you're listening to this seminar right now. If you're listening to the seminar on accident, then maybe you don't want to learn more about them. But we would argue those are probably the people you do want to research, because instead of us focusing our time and energy on people who are insignificant and do not matter, let's try to learn about some of the comrades who sacrificed their life so that we could be in a better position ideologically, physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever, so that we can continue to organize and make a difference. We had a wonderful keynote yesterday. Dr. Mjiba Freewat, who's also a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union within the party. And she said, quite frankly, really, we should all be doing this work because we shouldn't be paying attention to the Dr. Shukuras and the Dr. Mjibas. We should understand that those are infinite people that are all contributing collectively on a mass level towards the greater good for humanity, towards eradicating oppression for all oppressed people, right? So hopefully we can get to a point where we're not just calling out the Dr. Martin Luther Kings and the Dr. Shukuras. Hopefully we'll get to a point where we don't need to necessarily mention Mumia Abu Jamal, because we understand that he was a part of something so much bigger that still needs to be maintained, you all. And therefore we still have a responsibility, even after the story of Mumiga continues, but also gets replaced by some new political prisoner who unfortunately has still been wrongly accused and falsely accused. And so just kind of bringing that into this context, right? So, so important. And it's also important and relevant because that's really the best way to resist imperialism and capitalism, is to not make it about yourself, right? So we just want to kind of think about those things. And in case I didn't make that point clear earlier, just to say that you as a responsible adult, like you have a responsibility to figure out what is the missing information in your life that you don't have access to because you did go to a public school that was backed by capitalism. And that's okay. You now have a responsibility to investigate that. If you are a parent, you have a responsibility, like Baba Ajamu did, to take it upon yourself to engage your children in these kind of struggles where they can communicate with these folks who have been wrongly accused. There's all kind of letter campaigns. There's all kind of ways that you can learn more about their story and read more about them. Also, you can use your voice to write about them and to educate other people. So I'm sure Baba Ajamu will talk more about some of those options, but just kind of putting that in a context of our experience as a family and how that has again like contributed to me being on the path that I'm on, right? And so just kind of putting that in reality so we can kind of see that. So if you're not familiar with Black August, like African Liberation Day, Pan African Women's Day, Juneteenth, etc. These are our institutions, you all. For African people, these are our institutions. We should be celebrating them. We should be taking time off from work if we're able. We should still be contributing if we can't take time off from work and organizing on the weekends, passing out flyers, creating flyers, promoting on our social media campaigns, sending this flyer to different community members. However, we can spread the word, get the word out there, we should be doing that. We also had a comrade yesterday who actually had to work and could not come to the event. But you know what? We asked the comrade to bring our paper goods and our plasticware and organized it, excuse me, so they could drop off those things the Friday before. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Even if you're not in a position to come physically, you still have a responsibility because our institutions are everything. We need to protect them, we need to celebrate them, and we certainly need to perpetuate them and promote them. What we don't need to do is to celebrate the oppressor's institutions, right? That's what we don't need to do. So, yeah, these are institutions that we need to hold to a high regard, right? And to celebrate and to recognize and respect by any means necessary. These institutions signify the work that can help liberate African people. It also signifies work that has already liberated African people, even though we know our struggle is not complete. So these days should not be permitted, right? Where we need to be cooped into celebrations of anything, right? But reminders that our need to continue fighting is continuance on us understanding the contradictions with imperialism, the contradictions with capitalism, how all of these different forms of white supremacy can manifest themselves to where they can take on a patriarchal role from a white supremacy standpoint. They might even take on a perpetuated white supremacy role with people of color perpetuating it. Just like you have non-male people who can perpetuate patriarchy, and you have queer people who can perpetuate homophobia, right? So I want us to kind of push into that a little bit more and like really look at what that looks like. Even looking at the image on the screen, you got all these different faces here. We've got the Move Nine. We've got different folks there. We have Mamuya there. Like just different ways that we can kind of think about what is this work and how does it span across all these different ways that we can think about it. I would argue it's not enough for us to just say their names and recognize them, but to hold them in our primary focus as we continue to use them as a directed direction, right, of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and kind of picking their legacy up and moving with it, right? Doing the things that they have informed us of doing, picking up their biographies and reading about them, right? Being able to spread more information about it, finding ways that their books have inspired other people, their poems, their blogs, the different ways that they have gotten their words out, the different organizations that these folks have belonged to, you all, because that's also a common denominator. And you know, we are always pushing for people to join some organization that is working for justice. Next slide, please. So don't forget that seeing what organizations they're a part of is always going to be a key factor with that. Okay, so we also want to kind of define like what we mean when we say liberation. So liberation is a means of the defeat of all forces that oppress us, meaning our fight against capitalist systems, imperialism, these different systemic oppressions that we find ourselves facing. Liberation means completely defeating any force that oppresses us by any means necessary, right? So we can think about African people being oppressed everywhere in the diaspora as well as on the continent, and everywhere that we exist. You can assume there is oppression connected to that, right? So even on the planet, like as a whole, we can assume that oppression exists for African people. So any institution whatsoever that we participate in that is not centering our struggle for liberation, it should be irrelevant to us in 2026 and beyond. We should be thinking closely, not just about our own liberation and our own oppressive eradication, but also how does our support financially give way to other institutions, excuse me, other organizations to oppress other individuals. Again, the comrade yesterday, the keynote spoke about how we all have these contradictions where we find ourselves supporting these entities that are problematic, like going to Starbucks. And if you know anything about Starbucks, you know that it's a Zionist organization, right? If you know anything about Target or Walmart, you know that these are imperialist corporations that are stealing resources all around the world, using them to create and to perpetuate and to cultivate the materials that they slap a profit on. Meanwhile, where they got those materials from in the first place, they have no intention of paying the land or the people that descend from the land, right? So being able to make those connections, you can see some examples here on the slide. By corporation, we mean efforts like Wells Fargo enriched in its shareholders by financing slave ships and plantations. And that was really interesting to me when you said that a couple of weeks ago, Baba Jama, because I knew that Wells Fargo had invested in our enslaved Africans as humans, but I did not know they also invested in the plantation ships themselves, right? And so that was just very interesting to learn when you said that. I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, just very interesting to learn about that. And also the purchase of our ancestors, we just mentioned that, as well as how they can seriously commemorate our freedom from slavery. There's some companies on here that you may not have known about: Pepsi, Ready to Work, right? Community First, Natera. And you also might recognize, you all, some of these logos you probably have seen on the latest Juneteenth flyer, because we're not even organized as a people where we can even see those contradictions. We're not in a position where we own our resources. We need these organizations. Well, we don't need them, but we are falsely under the impression that we need them, to where they can provide financial support for us to pull off these big events that we want to pull off. That's why when you go to a Juneteenth, you will see a Wells Fargo booth or a Bank of America booth or some type of imperialist, bank of some type, because that's probably a big backer for allowing that organization to host that event there, right? And so just think about the contradiction of that. Think about the contradiction of these banks, right? Think about